everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Bible Discovery's The Weekend Show. On this show and on Bible Discovery as a whole, we are going through the entire Bible this year. But on this show, we look at the week's reading, and my husband Matlock and I take viewer questions and we use them to discuss things. All those things, right, Matlock?
That's all
right?
those things.
Right?
That's right. That's right. So if you've been following along or reading with us, that's fantastic. We're reading this week was Genesis 12 to 29. And on Sunday, which is coming up, we are doing Psalms 4 to 6, which is nice. Psalm Sunday again.
Quite nice.
Quite nice.
Psalms Sunday.
Get used to it, yeah.
Not Palm
Not
Sunday.
Yeah, no, now you're getting me.
Psalms Sunday.
Psalms. Let's just jump into it, Corie.
Let's do it.
Okay, this pertains to Genesis 12 and Genesis 20.
Mm-hmm.
It's a viewer question from Matthew. And he asks, was Abraham justified in lying about his wife, Sarai, or Sarah, being his sister? Why did God afflict and speak to Pharaoh and Abimelech when he lied about Sarah being his sister and did not punish Abraham for lying? Abraham was a prophet, so why didn't he ask God to show him, I'm assuming he means, to show him a way out beforehand?
Yeah. Abraham was not justified in lying about his wife. And I think the text plays that out because in both cases, like you say in this question here, God deals with Pharaoh, God deals with Abimelech on behalf of Sarah to rescue Sarah from the situation. So this is one of the misconceptions that I think often happens about especially the patriarchs, because But I think to a broader extent, other people who feature in the Old Testament narratives and sometimes the New Testament narratives as well. But we have more life stories of people in the Old Testament that are given to us. But just because the Bible records things that they did does not mean that God is endorsing those things, right? So we have to make that distinction between this is what the Bible says happened and this is what God endorses, right? So we have to look carefully at these situations to see what it is that God approved and what he didn't approve. And because he rescues Sarah both of these times without her being touched, it's clearly a disapproval of Abraham allowing her to be taken in the first place. So this should be seen as some sort of moral failure on behalf of Abraham. Now, to your question, Abraham was a prophet, so why didn't he ask God to show him a way out beforehand? Again, I'm not sure. He definitely should have done that. But this is one of those times where we can see God still having a relationship with imperfect people who live in a very different time from our own. So it can be hard for us to understand their motivations sometimes. And in this case, I think it's really difficult for us to understand their motivations. We can see him trying to justify this lie, right? Because technically Sarah is his half-sister, but this is lying by omission and purposefully putting your wife, who was dependent on him for protection, in direct danger and in danger of being dishonorably treated as well. So definitely this should not be seen as God endorsing this kind of behavior, but we also see the turmoil in Abraham's family because of how he dealt with his family. So that shows up in the narrative as well. So we have to see, the Bible doesn't always just come out and say, and this was wrong. Rather, it shows, and this was wrong because look at the consequences. This is clearly not the best way. This is clearly not God's way because look at what happened because of it. So that's what I would say to that one.
Yeah. So I'm just going to read a couple of verses here to just kind of clarify, because it happens twice. At the end, Abraham says in chapter 20, verse 11, he says, I did it because Abimelech is context. Brennan was like, why did you do this to me? Right? Like how could you do this? And Abraham says, I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife, because she's beautiful. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my house, I said to her, this is the kindness you must do to me. Do me. At every place to which we come, say of me, he is my brother. Right? Then later on, it says, verse 17, it says, then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and also healed his wife and female slaves, that they bore children. for the Lord had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what's really interesting about this point too is that, like you're saying, he's not fully lying. He's omitting the truth here out of fear for his own life. So in here, and he's not even technically lying at all. I know you're saying a lying of omission, but what's I think is really interesting is that this is not.
He is lying because he's saying that she's marriageable.
Yes.
But he has a marriage contract with her.
It's not a verbal lie per se, is what I'm trying to say. There's a pattern of lying, a behavioral lie, right? He's allowing something to play out that just not ought to play out.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different what's it called? He's faulty for other reasons too. And one of those reasons, in my opinion, is that his fear of death is the primary factor that comes here.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than the fear of the Lord, he has a fear of death. So that to me is a primary factor we should take into consideration as well. Not just the fact that he was being deceptive, but the fact that he was more afraid of his life than he was of fearing the Lord and what he would do. He is a prophet of God after all. No, you're right. Absolutely right in everything that you said, that the text isn't saying that this is somehow virtuous or anything like that. It's just recording the facts. And it's for our instruction, because later on we see Isaac do this as well to another Abimelech,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but it's only once.
Yeah.
It's only once. So it's like you see this, like he adopts this pattern. And so you learn something from this. Like, oh, it's like the lies that you use that are strategic now and helpful for you are going to go, your children are going to adopt it.
Yeah.
So there's a practical lesson to be learned through this process as well.
And whatever we can justify, we will, right? Especially when we're scared.
That's right.
And we're acting out of selfishness.
Why didn't Abraham ask God to show him a way beforehand? It's like he could have.
He absolutely could. I think this is a lack of trust in God.
That's
as well,
right. That's right.
Right? Because he doesn't bring this issue before God, and he doesn't think that God is strong enough to stop. Like, God has already told Abraham, to your descendants, I will give this land.
That's right.
Like, and Abraham didn't have any descendants at that point. Abraham did with the first one, the first time that he pulled the stunt in Genesis 12. And so he's not putting his trust in God.
That's right.
He's not putting his faith in God.
Right.
And then afterwards, the second time he does this, he's not only received more promises,
right,
but he's told specifically, Sarah's going to have a son.
Yes.
Your son.
Right.
And it's through his descendants that
right.
the Messiah is going to come, that like all of these things. And yet he does it again.
Right.
Out of fear and not believing that God is going to accomplish
So you
his
see a
promises.
Weakness in Abraham, that he has a fear trusting the Lord. And it is like, but
Mhm.
yet even though it is him through which he's willing to offer a son. So he has great faith. I'm not saying that he had no faith. That's not.
But he had with all of us.
Yeah.
We have pitfalls.
Right. That's
we
right.
have areas where it's harder for us for whatever reason.
Yes.
It's harder for us to trust God in certain areas of our life.
That's right. And here he made this agreement with Sarah before he received the promise of God.
Yeah.
And that he's still leaning on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it comes to the forefront. It's like, why are you still leaning on this old promise that's not applicable anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like this old condition that you set with your wife before God told you you're going to have descendants, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if he was leaning on God's promises, he would not have gotten into this mess at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting to see this. And also too, Abraham then shows the power of God in these places. So the question becomes, was Pharaoh and Abimelech guilty in some sense of doing something wrong? That now Abraham's presence allowed for God to show his presence and his reality to them? Possibly. So God can use these moments, even all of our moral failures, to help show his reality to people at different moments in time. And Abimelech and Pharaoh could be experiencing this, obviously not in the best way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously a test for Abraham as much as a test for Pharaoh and Abimelech.
Mm-hmm.
They shouldn't just seize his wife, regardless of his sister. It was inappropriate behavior on all fronts.
And this is part of the Christian concept of, in our weakness, he is strong.
Mm-hmm.
Like even in when you love God, he can even use your mess ups to spread his reality.
That's right.
And to spread his truth, which is what you're talking about,
Yes.
because God speaks to Abimelech. God speaks to Pharaoh.
Right.
And so it's really, it's not as if then, like what the Apostle Paul says, well, if God's grace abounds, should we just keep sinning and sinning so more and more grace can
Right.
come? And Paul's like, that's ridiculous. Stop being foolish. Stop thinking like an evil man, right? It's just this amazing, faithful quality of God that when you love God and you mess up, he is still strong in your weaknesses, and he can still make something super ugly into something beautiful. He can redeem it. So this is exposing Abram's character as sometimes a faithless man, just imperfect man.
That's right.
But God's character as the perfect redeemer, and someone who cares not only about his chosen people, but about people who are outside of that umbrella as well, revealing himself to people like Abimelech and Pharaoh, which
That's
is really,
right.
really interesting.
That's right. God, a prophet of God, didn't heal the covenant people.
Mm-hmm.
He's healing people that were pagan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an amazing thing to think about for our calling. Corie?
Matlock, let's move on.
Let's move on.
You're right. Okay, Genesis 18 to 19, okay, the Sodom and Gomorrah narratives.
Yes.
The question that I have for you is there a relationship between Sodom and Gomorrah and the end times?
Okay. Yes, there is. And it's actually a really strong relationship that Christ points out. So I'm going to point to, I'm not going to read the whole verses, but it's Luke 17, verses 26 to 37. And this is part of, you read this also in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, 25. But here, let me just start off with verse 17. And actually, no, I will read it all, just for Brandon's sake. Just for our editor. I'll let him have some fun. All right, starting off first.
You're just going to make his life a little
That's
harder.
Right. Okay, so this is talking about the coming kingdom and the end of all things. Okay, so this is Jesus speaking. At verse 26, just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking, marrying, and being given into marriage until the day Noah went into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, here we are, they were eating and drinking and buying and selling and planting and building. But on the day when Lot went into the Sodom, fire and sulfur went out of Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So it will be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. On that day, let the one who is in the housetop with the goods in the house not come down to take them away, and likewise let the one who is in the field not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life will keep it. I tell you, in that night there will be two in one bed. One will be taken, the other will be left. There will be two women grinding together. One will be taken, one will be left. And they said to him, "Where, Lord? Where? Where are the corpses the vultures will gather?" Okay. Anyways. So what we have here is something really interesting, is that here you have Christ literally alluding that it's going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah, this destruction. Now, let's talk about these parallels. Because when you read Genesis 18 and Genesis 19, there actually are quite a lot of parallels between what's going to happen to Babylon in Revelation, this great city, and what happens to Sodom. Okay, so I want to point some parallels out, okay? So Revelation 11, verse 8, Babylon is called spiritual Sodom. Okay, so there's a relationship between the great city, okay, Babylon, is spiritual Sodom. That's one. Number two, in verse 3, which is also Genesis 19:1, there's two witnesses, okay, in Revelation that we know that we talked about. Mm-hmm. There's two witnesses, right, that judge the city. Well, believe it or not, there's two angels that go around judging Sodom, and they go around the city and stuff like that. Okay, in Matthew 24, verse 39, and Luke 21, verse 27, as well as Genesis 19, verses 5 to 17, the evil ones are swept away. And that's the key words, that the evil are swept away. So I'll read Genesis 19 here, verses 15 to 17. It says, "As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, 'Up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city.'" And that's exactly what you hear happening in Revelation when Noah gets in the ark and then the flood comes and the evil are swept away. That's what you read about in the Olivet Discourse. Okay. And also, too, with something really interesting, Genesis 19, verses 15 to 17, okay? Here you have something really, I think, interesting pertaining to what people often call the rapture. In Greek, the rapture simply means seizing, okay? It means to take, to snatch. And here what you have here is that after the angels say, "Get up and take your city," he lingers. Lot just kind of lingers about. Then it says, "So the men seized him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand, and the Lord was merciful to him, and they brought him out of this and set him outside the city." So you have something here where the righteous Lot is separated, right, from the wicked destruction that's going to come. And you see that happening throughout all of a discourse and everything like that, where the sheep and the goats are separated. So here it is with Lot. There's a separation that happens. And literally the angels are the ones who separate in Matthew 13 and Matthew 24 and 25 are the ones who separate the two, right? And that's also recorded in Revelation 14. The angels are the ones who separate the sheep from the goats, the weeds from the wheat, the righteous from the unrighteous, and stuff like that. So you have the angels doing this too. So you have a bunch of these parallels. And also too, it says that Sodom's destroyed in a single day. Mm-hmm. Revelation 18:8. Babylon's destroyed in a single day. So you have all these intricate parallels. And then on top of this whole thing, you have this wonderful image of Abraham interceding on our behalf, not on our behalf, on Sodom's behalf, being like, Lord, if there's 40 righteous people, will you spare the city, right? And he goes out, if there's 10 righteous people, spare the city. And then it comes down to one. He doesn't get time to one. God says, okay, well, there's one person, there's only one righteous man. So God doesn't spare the city, right?
God,
but
he spares the man.
He spares the man.
And the three women.
And the three women, right?
Then it turns into two, but still.
Then it turns into two rather quickly, right? But then the pillar of salt by Christ is also referenced as beware. Don't hold on to these things in life, right? So it's like, even though you see, so the amazing imagery is, okay, Christ is going to come back, right? And the parable of the virgins, the parable of the 10 virgins, where they're holding on to their, some have their lamps lit and some of them don't.
Yeah.
And when Christ returns, 5 go with Christ, 5 are left behind. What is this idea? They were sleeping, it says. They were all asleep, but some were wise and some weren't. And the same principle, as Christ was saying, those who seek to preserve their life will lose it. Those who seek after earthly things will lose it, will lose their life. So you have the same principle that's happening here, where people are not applying the gospel into their life. They just kind of fall into the whims of everyday life, and they stop caring. They just want to live a normal life, and they don't think about this stuff anymore, and that's just it. Well, that's literally what Christ says don't do, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really powerful not to look back like Lot's wife did, and look back and like, oh, these are the things, this is where my life was, this is all my earthly enjoyments. Look ahead, look forward, look to Christ, right? That's the goal. So that's the parallel that's being made here. There are other parallels, like I said, with Abraham, even paralleling in my mind the cloud of witnesses interceding for us before the Lord, and Abraham who's at a distance looking at Sodom before its destruction. You have the saints who are, praying for us in heaven. Anyways, I think there's a bunch of imagery here that you could pertain to it. Christ alludes to it, and it turns out there's a lot of additional parallels to be made that Revelation expounds on. So, yeah, there's a relationship, and it's pretty cool.
It is very cool.
Yeah,
I'll give
Corie,
you that. Yes.
Let's move on.
Let's do it.
Oh, it's related. How is Lot right? This is from PJ. How is Lot called righteous in the New Testament? He offered his daughter to a mob of evildoers. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So
yeah.
It's true. When you read Genesis 19, there seems to be this natural tension that's there, because we know that God is rescuing Lot because God has deemed him righteous. And yet the behavior that we see Lot being engaged in does not seem righteous to us. Like he's willing to sacrifice his daughters, 2 of them, young daughters who are still under his protection, to the mob to save these men that he doesn't know. Now, he knows they're angelic messengers, so that's something. He does feel burdened to protect them, but he doesn't seem particularly righteous. And then you think about it, and you're like, so if Sodom and Gomorrah were so evil, why is Lot integrating himself into this evil culture in the first place? Like, that doesn't seem right. And you can really build a case against Lot, and it may be even a justified case. However, God saw Lot's heart, and it was righteous. It does not mean he was perfect. It does not mean he was the goodest of the good guys.
That's right.
Right? He could have been a really bad good guy. And we talked about even Abraham making mistakes, right? Because they're not perfect. They're just people. They have their pitfalls. They have their weaknesses. They have their cultural lies that they believe and act in as well. So righteousness, this status of being right with God, is not dependent, and this is what Paul was getting at in the New Testament, is not, and Hebrews 11 is getting at as well, the hall of faith in 2 Peter, which we're going to read in a second, our righteousness is not dependent on our perfect behavior. It is not. We have always depended, whether Old Testament or New Testament, we have always depended on the mercy of God, on his graciousness towards us. Abraham's faith in God, his trust in God was accounted to him as righteousness. And we can see in Genesis, it wasn't a perfect faith. Sometimes he didn't act in faith, right? But he wanted to believe God. It's that whole, when the man comes to Christ and asks for healing, I believe, Lord, but forgive my unbelief, right? We're not going to be perfect in it. So when we read Genesis 9, it's really easy to build a case against Lot. But when we go into 2 Peter, where Lot is called righteous, I think it's so interesting because the context of 2 Peter here is Peter is talking about the destruction and the judgment of false teachers.
That's right.
That there are false prophets in the early Christian church, and there are false teachers, and they are destined for destruction.
Right.
So they are the baddest of the baddies. Okay. And then, so Peter in verse 4, he goes, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, referencing back probably to Genesis 6 and those Nephilim, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what's going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. Then, if all those things are true, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority. Now, the fact that Lot is mentioned in that list gives me great hope for myself, right? Because what Peter is drawing out of Genesis 19, he's like, yeah, okay. We can say, yeah, okay, Lot didn't do everything right. He didn't respond well to that situation. But what was he trying to accomplish by offering his daughters? Offering his daughters wasn't right, but what was he trying to accomplish? He recognized that what the mob wanted to do was evil. And he was like, I can't let this happen.
Right.
This is against God. I can't let this happen. And so that was the motivation for it. So even though he went about it in arguably the wrong way, it was still coming out of an intention of, I want to follow God, and I have to at some point stand up against evil.
Right. But even more so, when you look at this 2 Peter passage, 2 things to keep in mind. One, first of all, pertaining to the question, it says specifically in the New Testament he's called righteous. Hold on. In the Old Testament he's called righteous because that's why he's saved.
Exactly.
Okay,
100%.
Right? He's called righteous. So the question then becomes, okay, so how is he righteous? You already went into that details. But let's look at what this means. Why is he making these poor decisions? Okay? Because everyone recognizes they're a bad decision. Okay.
Yeah,
it takes no brain to see that this is a bad decision.
Yeah.
But let's see what Peter says. Okay? He says, if God rescued Lot, greatly distressed by sensual conduct of the wicked. Okay, so these wicked are just so sexually depraved. And then it says, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds, and he saw and heard. Tormenting.
Yeah.
The key here is that over time, this pollutes you, this hurts you, this twists you, this is tormenting. You're not going to make the best character choices. What does it say? What does Paul say? Bad character corrupts good character, or bad behavior.
Bad company corrupts good character.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you for correcting me on that. That's what I'm saying. He's surrounded by bad company.
Mm-hmm.
The whole city is bad. And so he's being tormented by what he taught. He's being tormented by what he learned, but it is righteous. He has a righteous heart. Like you said, God saw that. However, it's like he's trying to now how to figure out, by everything he's learned, everything he's seen, his daughters being raised up in this environment and they're being polluted by it. They're all polluted by it.
Yeah.
So he's doing with the knowledge that he has the best that he can, like you were saying, while still being tormented by it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And we find out just how much it's affected his wife.
That's right.
When they're leaving. Like she agrees to leave, but then she looks back.
And this is
desiring back to it. So Lot and his daughters were able to turn away from it. They weren't so far. They were able to be like, no, it's evil. We have to follow the commands of God.
Yes.
But she wasn't. So we get to see how ingrained that had become in her.
That's right. So think about that. Think about that. Jesus says about Lot's wife, remember Lot's wife? Don't be like her, basically.
Yeah.
They were rescued from the destruction. And yet she still looked back.
Yeah.
Right?
She still wanted to go back.
The Sodom was still in her heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it affected his, obviously we know how, his grandchildren come about through right, incest. So it was in his daughters. It's like it just completely. So this is and also a very practical lesson. But where are you going to spend your life?
100%.
And how this is
like read Ephesians 4. Right? Like the old man, when you become a Christian, the old man needs to die and we need to put on the new man. No longer living as we once lived. Don't look back.
That's right.
Don't desire. Once you come to Christ and you are made new, don't look back. You're not going to be perfect.
That's right.
Lot wasn't perfect. His daughters weren't perfect, but they didn't look back.
Yeah, that's right.
Like they sinned, sure, but they weren't longing for their life in Sodom and Gomorrah. They weren't mourning for that in that sense.
That's right. So it's such a practical lesson to learn about, like just even you go to school, you're just trying to live your day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And then what kind of company are you keeping?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What kind of company are your kids keeping? What kind of company is your wife or your husband keeping?
Mm-hmm.
And how is that affecting their relationship with God? Because the last thing you want to have them do is look back like Lot's wife did. And then she turns to pillar, right? So that is like, so it's so crucial. Now, these are all images, as they say, for salvation.
Mm-hmm.
It does not necessarily mean that she's damned to hell.
Mm-hmm.
She looked back. He said, just don't look back, right? But there's an image for us to remind ourselves, because when Christ returns, he tells us don't look back. And that destruction is worse because Sodom was a type of what's to come, right?
Absolutely.
An example of. So that's very important.
It is.
It's very important to keep in mind.
Anyways, I think so as well. Should we do one more question really quickly?
Let's just do it.
Okay, so we have only a couple minutes to answer this, Matlock, so you are on the hot seat. I'm enjoying this. This one's from Joshua, and he asks, does God bless deception? Rebekah and Jacob deceive a blind Isaac into giving Jacob the blessing intended for Esau. Was this deception part of God's plan, or was it morally wrong? The narrative seems to imply that Jacob was destined to receive the blessing, but the method by which he obtains it is troubling. Was Jacob's deception of Isaac morally justifiable?
Okay, so no, just because someone's doing something wrong and God permits it doesn't mean it's morally justifiable.
Right.
So he did it the wrong way. God foreknew that this was going to happen. It does not mean that it's right because it's going to happen. It's just the way it is. So Jacob, like we look earlier to how he took the birthright. Okay, so he tried to snake the birthright earlier off Esau. What he did by selling his birthright over a can of stew, right, or a little can of soup, whatever it is. Probably was Campbell's.
It was homemade. Wasn't even canned.
It wasn't even canned.
Come on.
Sorry.
Come on now.
I'm just being facetious. But the point is that, right?
Easy to drag Esau through
it was a test for Esau.
Yeah,
it was. Esau just totally,
it was revealing of his character and what he valued. He didn't value it. He didn't want it.
That's exactly right. So then you kind of have this again, that Jacob wanted it more.
Yes.
Jacob wanted the birthright more than Esau did. And I think that's what it kind of boils down to. Now, granted, does that make it morally justifiable? No, you went about the wrong way. Could there have been a proper way? Well, we do know that there was a prophecy given to Rachel.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Rebekah.
Rebekah, excuse me.
Rebekah.
Yes.
So God had told Rebekah that the older would serve the younger.
That's
it was
right.
a prophecy given to Rebekah. Now, perhaps Isaac wasn't willing to honor that because maybe he wasn't there for God giving this prophecy to Rebekah. But there's something to be said here about, like, we don't know the conversations that they had in their home. So perhaps this was a topic of conversation, and perhaps this was her final way of trying to make it happen. Just as Abraham was desperate for a son, and so he and Sarah contrived to have Hagar, Ishmael through Hagar, right?
Right.
So that was their final act of desperation. Maybe this was Rebekah's final act of maybe
Right.
she had tried diplomacy with Isaac and it had failed.
Right.
But doesn't make it right. Deception is still wrong.
That's right.
And what would have happened, we'll never know. What would have happened if Rebekah went to God and was like, okay, you gave me this prophecy.
Right.
But Isaac's not going to bless. What do I do here?
Right.
And just see, like we don't know what would have happened.
No, we don't.
But again, like this, when it comes especially to these narratives in Genesis with the patriarchs, is so interesting because if you follow through with Jacob's life, Jacob as a deceiver gets deceived.
Yes.
In by Laban.
That's right.
Multiple times.
That's right.
And so when you sow deception,
you reap it.
You reap deception.
Yeah, that's right.
And he has this turning moment where God changes his name.
That's right.
Right? From deceiver, from grasper.
Right.
To you've contended with men with God and you have prevailed.
That's right.
And he wants to move him into this new time now where he is like this patriarch of Israel.
Yeah, he learned the hard way. He learned the long way around. He had to spend so many years under Laban to basically realize that he was wrong. So then he had to, he asked Esau for forgiveness, like how he handled everything. Mm-hmm. Esau was just willing to. Esau, you know what? Esau's like your classic bro.
Yeah.
He's your classic bro. You can see why the dad's like, oh, this guy loves sports. Like he's just into like, he loves hunting. He just had your classic, like your boyish qualities.
Yeah.
That it's like very typical for like a dad to like. Well, not always, but typically, like the stereotypical dad. But despite that, Esau had good conduct with him. He's just happy to see him.
Yeah.
So it's like the relationship was mended. And all the prophecies did come true, even though it went about the wrong way. Yeah. People had to learn the long way around, right? As opposed to directly from God.
It would be the easiest thing in the world for us to look at the narrative of Jacob and be like, you know what? God thinks deception's okay.
Yeah.
God thinks polygamy's okay. God thinks it's great. Like all these things are great.
Right.
But then when you actually pay attention to the narrative, you can see, here's what happened. Here's all the evil that happened through it.
That's right.
And here's how God had to redeem it.
That's right.
And then like actual Mosaic laws come in later to prohibit some of these things.
So often the Lord allows us to permits us to do evil to show us that we're evil.
Yes.
And that because the default disposition of, and we'll get into this next week, the default disposition of mankind is to assume that we're good, is to assume that we're God.
Yeah.
It's for the Garden of Eden. And so that's what he has to contend with.
So often we have to learn the hard way, but don't you learn the hard way. We're trying not to learn the hard way. Pop your comments and your questions down in the comment section below. If you are not watching on YouTube, if you're listening on one of our other platforms, then you can always shoot us an email as well. Go to BibleDiscoveryTV.com. You can get our contact information there. If you are on YouTube, all of our info's in the description box. But yeah, pop down your comments, questions for future shows down there. And until next week, happy reading and studying.